is that we don't want to be forced to choose between our largest trading partner, which is China, and our largest security partner, which is the United States. And so Australia, other middle powers in ASEAN and around the world face a similar dilemma when it comes to balancing this major power competition. And it's becoming more and more difficult to do the more these two great powers lock horns and compete across a range of fronts. So we have to learn to navigate more smartly, to play our diplomatic cards much more carefully, certainly not to have loud microphones and to shout at either one, and look for cooperation where we can find it.
Today we are discussing trade and economic cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, focusing on ASEAN's role amid rising geopolitical competition. That leads me to the next question about Australia's seen as a middle power. How can countries like Australia and Cambodia navigate between major powers while maintaining economic openness?
Yes, I think this is a balancing act that ASEAN countries have been playing longer than Australia, and in some ways arguably better than Australia. But at the end of the day, the ASEAN maxim, which I think Australia subscribes to, is that we don't want to be forced to choose between our largest trading partner, which is China, and our largest security partner, which is the United States. And so Australia, other middle powers in ASEAN and around the world face a similar dilemma when it comes to balancing this major power competition. And it's becoming more and more difficult to do the more these two great powers lock horns and compete across a range of fronts. So we have to learn to navigate more smartly, to play our diplomatic cards much more carefully, certainly not to have loud microphones and to shout at either one, and look for cooperation where we can find it.
With companies adopting China Plus One strategies, can Cambodia realistically benefit from production relocation? What must it get right?
So yes, in principle, Cambodia has some of the key ingredients, particularly labor-intensive production, assembly-based manufacturing, low wages that go with that, and that's an important, necessary condition. But there is competition, not least Vietnam, other countries in the region, the Philippines, Indonesia, etc. And you have to be competitive, which means putting in place good infrastructure, having conducive regulations that enable multinational companies to want to come in and invest in Cambodia and not in those competitor countries. So what is it that gives Cambodia that edge over the competition? And it can't just be the wage rates, it's a bigger package than that.
So my next question is, Australia has deepened its engagement with ASEAN in recent years. From your perspective, what is Australia's strategic economic interest in Southeast Asia?
So for Australia, we are really part of the neighbourhood. So our biggest regional neighbour is Indonesia. We firmly connected into the Southeast Asian region through economic ties and cultural ties, and these are long-standing relationships. The Australian government prioritises ASEAN in its external relations strategy, both as markets, but also as investment destinations. And you might have heard of the Invested 2040 strategy that the Prime Minister's office formulated a couple of years ago. And that really reflects the strategic primacy that Australia accords to the ASEAN region.
Following the USAID funding cut, Australia has been actively engaging with Cambodia. Can you also talk about this?
Yes, the USAID funding cut has affected many things, many countries, many projects the projects particularly were closed down, not the countries. So in that context, with a sudden stop in aid flows into the region and into key projects, Australian aid or development cooperation, as we call it, looms even larger. There's a higher value on it, and Australia has stepped up by modestly increasing its aid into the region, not just Southeast Asia, also into the Pacific. And again, that reflects the strategic priority that Australia accords to the region.
You are closely involved in a services trade policy. How important is services trade to the future growth of ASEAN economies, including Cambodia?
So in Cambodia's case, currently you're a least developed country. Soon, hopefully, you won't be anymore. All countries really start out by emphasizing agriculture and primary production, mining, for example, evolved through a manufacturing phase, which Cambodia is in currently. But if you want to manufacture, you require a variety of services inputs. If you just think of finance, for example, and the financial services industry, you need finance to kickstart manufacturing, production and investment. And also in the modern global economy and the shift to digitalization particularly, there are so many services that can be provided through digital means, cross-border, downloading an app from the internet, for example, and that offers opportunities for what economists would call technological leapfrogging. And so if you can get into that game, which requires investments, a lot of investments into education and upskilling your people, and education is another service.
What can Cambodia do and Australia do to up the level of trade between the two countries?
What Australia is certainly doing on its side through its Invested 2040 strategy is encouraging particularly big Australian superannuation funds or pension funds to seek out investment opportunities in Cambodia. Now, if those investments can flow, trade will flow as a result. But there's also the world of trade agreements and trade cooperation arrangements, and on that front we're doing a lot already. So both Australia and Cambodia are members of the RCEP, or Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, an ASEAN-centric agreement. We're also both members of the ANZFTA agreement, very complicated sounding acronym, but it stands for ASEAN Australia New Zealand Free Trade Agreement. It's a little bit more ambitious than the RCEP agreement, but still similar sets of countries covering similar issues. Maybe in the future, Cambodia will join the CPTPP, Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, and that's a more high standards agreement. And if Cambodia makes it into the CPTPP, it means its domestic regulatory frameworks and institutional settings would have met the requirements, which would be good for attracting investors and providing a stable investment environment, and that would further encourage trade flows.
Maybe discussion perhaps to simplify for our Cambodian audience to look at the relationship between Cambodia and Australia at right now in terms of diplomacies and trade. Can you describe the situation right now?
My sense, though, is that relations are improving. They're not starting from a low base. I think they're starting from a reasonable base. And certainly the Australian government is interested in elevating that relationship. So I think it's healthy. Australia has a range of regional interests, of course, and Cambodia is part of that. So more focus will be put on countries like Indonesia, for example, which is a major trading partner, a major, literally, neighbour in terms of northern Australia in particular, whereas Cambodia is further away. So distance also plays a role. The relative economic size plays a role. So Vietnam is your neighbour. It's likely that we will place more priority on the relationship with Vietnam because it's a bigger market, it's that carries bigger political weight and so on. Which doesn't mean we don't like Cambodia, it just means that's where the resources flow.
Thank you, Peter, for spending your time with us. And this is the end of our episode today. Thank you for watching.